So, hello and welcome back to War Footprints. Today we're going to talk about this lady, Lee Miller. Have a look at some of her work during World War II and a bit about her life, a bit about her background. I am reading from some notes, so just bear with me. My brain can't quite retain everything because there's just that much to share. And if I'm giving you an information video, I want the information to be correct. So if I have to read from some notes, then so be it, I'm afraid. So just bear with me. So Lee Miller was American. She was born in 1907 in New York. She first entered the world of photography as a model in the 1920s, to then progress, move on, open her own photographic studio in the city. She travelled the world, visited Paris around 1937 and met her future husband, Roland Penrose, who was a surrealist artist, who became her second husband. So they travelled around a bit, Greece, Romania, ended up in Egypt. 1939, she left Egypt, moved to London just before the outbreak of World War II. So when the Second World War started, she obviously was in London. So that's where she got a freelance job for Vogue magazine. So she'd cover the Blitz, the ATS, because they'd man anti-aircraft gun posts and searched spotlights. And the ATA, when their pilots were transporting planes to and from other airfields around the country for maintenance and bits and pieces, but we will go into that in more depth. So in 1944, she became an accredited correspondent for the US Army. She often teamed up with her friend that she kept bumping into, David Sherman. He worked for Life magazine. He also taught her how to be a correspondent, basically. So she followed the US troops overseas after D-Day, becoming one of very few women war correspondents on the front line in Europe. We will be taking a look at some of her work. There will be some of her Holocaust work. So we will be taking a look at some of her work, where it was taken, when it was taken, have a look at the images and just a bit about them and a bit of a timeline through her life during the Second World War. I will put a warning before because I know not everybody wants to see that sort of stuff, and I will put the timestamp if you want to skip that bit and just move on to the rest. So let's get into some of her work. So our first photo up is this one of a public air raid shelter sign in Westminster in London. 1940, the Blitz were a prominent part of the British war. You can see the building in the background with broken glass windows, bits of rubble on the floor and sandbags out the front. Public air raid shelters were a vital part in saving lives during the Blitz. So this is a rarely seen shot from the Vogue feature British Women Under Fire. The article celebrates a vital contribution of women on their home front during the Blitz. In the war against fire, gas and explosions, every woman, whether she belongs to one of the women's auxiliary services or not, is a fighter. Every household wife must attend lectures on gas defence, must keep her house always stocked with sand buckets, water buckets, shovels and pumps for fire bombs, and with tin food, oil lamps, first aid material, biscuits and chocolate, and a suitcase full of good warm clothes, ready for an instant departure. So this is 1941. Again, the Blitz was still going on. So which then leads on to one of Lee Miller's most famous photographs. The German bombing frequently cut the electrics to the Vogue studio, so Lee Miller often used exterior locations for her fashion shots. This location is the entrance to an air raid shelter in the garden of Roland Penrose's house in Hampstead. The masks were issued by air raid protection wardens to protect them from incendiary. So if you watch the new movie, it shows you how Lee went about making this one. You can see the girls wearing their fireman. So this is of Pilot Anne Douglas of the Air Transport Auxiliary. So the Air Transport Auxiliary was a civilian service that was tasked with the delivery of aircraft from its factories to the squadrons of the RAF and the Royal Navy and delivery of supplies. These women played a vital role in getting the RAF and the Navy what they needed when they needed. So, 1943, women of the Auxiliary Territorial Army operate a searchlight battery at South Mimms in England, which at the time put them at great risk. Because, if you're a German bomber flying over and you get spotted by a searchlight, you're going to want to take that searchlight out. So after this picture was taken, the raiders came over and raked the battery with machine gun fire. So this is a photo of Lee Miller taken by her friend David Sherman. They were in Portsmouth. This was 1943, so a little bit before they went over into Europe. So now in Normandy in 1944, D-Day has taken place. So Lee Miller's first assignment was the Unarmed Warriors. This covered an evacuation hospital. So the evacuation nurses arrived in Normandy in 1944. Lee reported that the hospital was for the desperately wounded. Every case was life or death. Vogue ran Lee's full story in 14 images in their September issue, astonished by Lee's reportage and the skill with the camera telling the whole story. So you can see a tired nurse just catching 5 minutes. Again, this image was recreated in the movie. The caption reads, "A bad burns case asked me to take his picture as he wanted to see how funny it looked. It was pretty grim and I didn't focus good." Lee Miller in her dispatch titled Unarmed Warriors, published in US Vogue 15th September 1944. Was also published in the UK Vogue. Leaving the evacuation hospital, Lee Miller gets told she can go to St. Malo, which has been liberated by the Allies. But that wasn't quite the case. When she got there, they were still in the process of taking the village and came under heavy shell fire. So this first image, you can see a cloud of black smoke, and if you look closely, there is a plane. So that's a US P-38 aircraft in a napalm strike on the Citadel. Napalm was still on the secret list at this point, so the negatives and photos that Lee took were confiscated by the censor, but returned a few months later. The napalm exceeded where the high explosives failed, and the Germans surrendered immediately. Here's another shot of St. Malo in the napalm attack. This aerial bombardment of the Citadel using high explosive did little damage to the heavily dug-in Germans, and subsequent assault by the US soldiers was repelled with heavy losses. The Rolleiflex Lee used did not have a telephoto lens, so she had to get as close as it looks in the picture, in this case 700 yards away. US Vogue, Free France Again, St. Malo, published on October 15th, 1944, whereas the British Vogue published it as the Siege of St. Malo. Waves of Allied bombers at 15-minute intervals attacked the Citadel at St. Malo. Lee Miller wrote that she thumbed a ride to the Siege of St. Malo. I had brought my bed. I begged my board and was given a grandstand view of the fortress warfare. Lee had believed the newspaper reports that said St. Malo had fallen on the 5th of August. As a female war correspondent, were not allowed on the front line, she had no idea she would end up breaking this rule. Only armed with clothes on her back, around 24 rolls of film, and her bed, Lee arranged to stay in St. Malo as the only photographer for miles around. She felt she now owned a private war. A single boot with the discarded ammunition seems to give a full picture of the chaos and destruction in St. Malo. So, after the D-Day invasion, parts of France were starting to be liberated. The armband worn tells us this is a FFI worker combined French resistant fighters that branded together under the leadership of de Gaulle during the Nazi occupation of France. They wore civilian clothing, armed themselves, only wore the armband to identify themselves. For the FFI and the civilian women, elaborate hair, frilled pretty dresses and lipstick became a form of resistance in occupied Paris during World War II. The Nazi feminine ideal was young, fertile women with a natural appearance. They should be in good physical shape, healthy and moderately tanned. Blonde, relatively short hair, blue eyes were an advantage. Aryan beauties abstained from both cigarettes and alcohol, not to mention makeup or dressing in a frivolous way. Their cheeks were clean, their lips unpainted, their clothes were practical. When shopping, they preferred German goods and never wasted money on pointless and unnecessary beauty products. Using lipstick and dressing prettily became an act of patriotism for the French women. The scarcity of the ingredients to produce lipstick forced French women to invent replacements, and whatever could be found of substances such as beeswax or staining with beetroot was employed to keep their lips red. So once French towns were liberated, French resistance generally sought out women that were accused of Nazi collaboration. So that would have been helping them in any way, sleeping with them, cooking them food, being nice to them, flirty with them. And in most cases, they would be publicly shamed and their heads would be shaven so that you could see who had done it and what they'd done. Fast forwarding to 1945 is a picture of a couple of German soldiers enjoying a cigarette. So as the Allies were working deeper into Germany, they were finding factories and bits and pieces that helped the German forces. This was an assembly line in a half-track factory in Frankfurt. So during World War II, as an accredited US war correspondent, Lee Miller for Vogue, David E. Sherman for Life magazine, continually crossed paths as they followed the US allies across Europe. Documenting the liberation and the horrors of war, they became one of the most highly regarded and often envied duos of the war. How is every time I arrive somewhere to cover a story, you and Lee Miller are just leaving, wrote Margaret Higgins of the New York Herald Tribune. It was David E. Sherman who gave Lee the idea of becoming a war correspondent, showing her the ropes during the early part of the war in England. So also as they were going deeper into Germany, they would find the horrors of concentration camps and the Holocaust and what was really happening, that thousands and thousands of people were going missing and nobody knew anything about it. So the next few images will be a bit harder to look at, so if you want to skip it, the timestamp is on the screen. The first camp Lee Miller got to was Birkenwald. It's a pile of dead bodies of the prisoners that were encased in the camp. Every disease imaginable was rife in the camp, and weakened by starvation and abuse, the prisoners died in their thousands. Published in both the US and the UK Vogue. This one was captioned as punishment. SS guards who tortured prisoners beg mercy on their knees are beaten by ex-prisoners. Any SS guards, or any guards at all for that matter, that had figured out it was the end of the road for them, that the Allies were closing in, they'd dress in civilian clothes and try to escape. Obviously some of the prisoners got hold of them and made sure that didn't happen. Lee Miller went to was Dachau. So this is a photo of the liberated prisoners with a pile of clothes, piles of other prisoners' clothes in the yard. lots of German officers decided not to escape and decided to commit suicide with them and their families. So this is an image of the Deputy Burgermeister's daughter in Leipzig in 1945. Possibly one of the most famous images of Lee Miller is this one in Hitler's bathtub. So this is in Hitler's Munich apartment. So there's a image of Hitler on the bathtub, and you can note her boots on the bath mat, where she's rubbed the dust of the concentration camp Dachau, where she was in the morning, onto the bath mat. Again, in Hitler's bathtub, but this time it's David Sherman. Lee slightly adjusted the shot and tilted the camera up to show the shower head, because at Dachau they found the shower block was actually a gas chamber and the gas would come out of the shower heads. And David Sherman was a Jew, so here you can see a Jew in Hitler's bathtub underneath the shower. So with the Allies, they eventually arrived at Berchtesgaden in 1945 in the Bavarian Alps. So this is a very peaceful image of the mountains. And finally, some years later, this was Lee Miller's and Roland Penrose's house, Farley, in Sussex. After the war, Lee Miller stayed in London and continued to work for Vogue. She covered fashion and the celebrity culture. Also took portraits of well-known artist Pablo Picasso. They became quite good friends over the years. She married Roland Penrose. They had a son, Anthony. After they had him, they moved to Farley's, very nice looking countryside house in East Sussex. When they moved there, Lee moved away from the world of photography and actually became an award-winning cook. Lee Miller did sadly pass away in 1977 at home at Farley's. So about a month ago, in the middle of September, the Lee Miller movie, Lee, came out, starring Kate Winslet and Alexander Skarsgård and a few other. Well, no, it is incredible. It really is. I think I went to see it about 3 days after it came out. It's honestly one of the best movies I've ever seen. It's incredible. With myself doing a US war correspondent impression for reenacting next year, it's honestly an incredible movie. So if you get a chance to watch that at any point, I highly recommend that you go do. It shows the process. It's basically what we've just been through. So it shows her life during the World War II. It shows how she made some of the photos, and then you see Kate Winslet as Lee recreating them in the movie. Lee Miller did suffer after the war with PTSD. She did try to cut up a lot of her negatives and everything. So she didn't want the world to see what she had seen. So thank you for watching. That is it for today. Let me know what you think about Lee Miller, her work. Let me know if you've seen the movie, what you thought of that. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, all that good stuff. It really does help. Believe it or not, it does. It's all free as well, as history should be. And I will see you in the next one.